Hi there. So today in supply chain management, we are going to be reviewing section 8, which is on sourcing and procurement. So let's begin. Let's see if I can. There we go. So let's go back to the very beginning of class, the first day when we talked about the three big things that supply chains do. And we buy things, procurement. We have to buy the raw materials to make our goods and services. This is what procurement is, sourcing and procurement. And then, of course, we've got to make our things. That's production, that's manufacturing. And then we've got to move and store things. That's logistics and transportation. And let's go back to our original sandwich analogy. Again, something very simple all of us have made at some point in our lifetimes. So we know that we're going to need to buy things in order to actually make our sandwich. So we want to make a really good, high quality turkey bacon Swiss sandwich. So I'm going to need to buy all of my ingredients from somewhere, from some retailer, from some store, all of my raw materials. I'm going to need bread. I'm going to need some high quality sliced turkey. I'm going to need some sliced Swiss cheese. I'm going to need some delicious bacon. I'm going to need lettuce. I'm going to need tomato. I'm going to need mayo. So how do I begin in this process? So our step one is going to be with procurement. So this is our act of obtaining our equipment, our supplies, or services that we need for our business. So with our sandwich, which stores are we going to choose in order the places where we are going to buy all of our raw materials, all of our ingredients? Do we want to go right down the street to County Market or to Fairway? Or do we want to trek all the way across town to Galesburg, maybe to go to Walmart, Aldi, or Hy-Vee? So we've got to choose which stores are we going to choose from. Are we going to have to go to multiple different stores to purchase the different items? So we've got to think about that in terms of making our sandwiches, is from whom are we going to buy from? And then once we're actually in the stores, which products are we going to choose? Are we going to choose organic? Are we going to choose the highest quality? Are we going to choose the lowest price? And then we've got to think about some other things. How far in advance of making the sandwich am I going to go to the store to buy all of my raw ingredients? Am I going to go a month before, 6 months before, a week before, an hour before? So I've got to think of all these things as I'm going through the procurement process. And then what quantity of the materials am I buying? Am I buying in bulk? Am I only buying enough for exactly one sandwich? We've got to think about these things when we're in the procurement process of supply chain. So what we're going to do is we are going to be discussing, all the different parts. Let's go back. Okay, we've got to think about all the different issues that an organization must consider as part of the procurement process. Again, we've talked about our sandwich analogy. We're going to talk about regular business types of decisions and issues that we've got to think about. We've got to make decisions about what we're going to buy. We've got to make decisions about where we're going to buy it, what level of quality do we buy, when to buy, how much to buy at one time, the pricing for what we buy. And these choices that procurement makes have a really big effect on the cost, on the quality of providing our end consumers with the products and the services that they want. So the money that we save in an organization by making really good purchasing decisions allows us to lower our prices that we're going to charge to our customers, and or it allows us to increase profits. So really good sourcing and procurement practices can contribute significantly to organizational success. So it's a really important factor in terms of just an overall business's success in whatever they are doing. So the acquisition of materials, of services, of equipment, of raw ingredients, of the exact right qualities in the right quantities, at the right prices, at the right time, and on a continuing basis is very important to any business. So traditionally, procurement was regarded as being kind of this unimportant kind of back office requirement. Yeah, we need it to get done, but it's a very clerical thing. Anyone can do it. And corporate executives paid very little attention to anything having to do with procurement. However, as global competition started to intensify in the 1980s, executives really realized the impact of how procurement can affect our manufacturing or production costs, the quality, new product development, and the lead time in order to deliver these new products. So a lot of more savvy CEOs, more savvy executives adopted new supply chain management concepts that emphasize procurement as one of the key strategic business processes. No longer was it this unimportant clerical back office type of job. It was becoming very important and it was strategic to our overall business processes. So it's no longer considered something that is just unimportant, that just needs to get done. It's very important to business success. So the process of buying things for an organization can have many different names. So if any of you decide to get into sourcing and procurement, you may hear a lot of common terms, especially when you're looking for jobs. You may see, of course, sourcing, procurement. You may see purchasing. You may see supply management, just like supply chain, remove the chain. You may see acquisitions. You may see buying, industrial buying. You may see contracting. So there's a lot of different names that people used for the act of buying things for an organization. And a lot of times these terms are often used interchangeably, or they have different meanings depending on what organizations use them. So let's talk about the main difference between sourcing and procurement. While sourcing and procurement are not exactly the same thing, they are incredibly closely related, which leads to some confusion over which is which, what is the difference. So sourcing is actually a part of procurement, but it's not the whole part. So sourcing falls under the entire procurement umbrella. The main difference is that sourcing focuses purely on the suppliers and those supplier relationships, the other businesses that we're buying from, whereas procurement focuses on that entire end-to-end buying process. So again, sourcing focuses purely on the suppliers and supplier relationships, where procurement focuses on the entire buying process. So when I say supplier, what do I mean by that? So the companies that sell another business, goods and services, are suppliers. Sometimes you'll hear the word vendors used. And every single organization needs suppliers. Therefore, the organization's approach to how it treats its suppliers, its procurement processes, its procurement policies, the relationships with these suppliers are not only going to impact the performance of said suppliers, but also our own performance as well as that business. No organization can be successful without the support of its suppliers. So they're an integral part of that supply chain, and they're integral for our success as well. So let's talk a little bit about sourcing. So sourcing focuses on those supplier relationships. It focuses on finding potential new suppliers and trying to mitigate any risks of taking on new suppliers, someone who we have never bought from before. So before all of our valuable materials can be purchased and delivered to our manufacturing or production site, we first need to find the suppliers to actually deliver and buy from. And we also have to vet them properly. We've got to vet them, ensure that they're going to meet our standards. So sourcing includes finding and vetting suppliers, but it doesn't necessarily include actually purchasing the materials or services to run our business. However, if we have a very effective sourcing process of managing those relationships with our suppliers and finding new suppliers, we're going to be able to find very reliable, very cost-effective, affordable, and quality suppliers to purchase what we need. Sourcing teams are always busy. There is never a time when they are not doing anything, because we always have to have backup suppliers just in case one falls through. And businesses are ever changing, they're dynamic, our needs change, our geographic market areas change. We need to find new suppliers for these ever changing needs. And again, we're always going to want to have backup suppliers just in case something falls through with one of our existing incumbent suppliers. So let's talk about procurement now. So procurement is the process of purchasing and acquiring materials, goods, and services that an organization needs to conduct business. It is that end-to-end process. So before our supply chains can start cranking out manufactured or produced products, it's got to purchase the materials in order to create them. And again, it's an end-to-end process that covers all the activities like planning. Where are we going to buy? When are we going to buy? How much are we going to buy? Negotiating, negotiating how much we need, maybe the pricing, maybe contract terms, placing purchase orders, doing inspections on incoming goods, and then payment to those suppliers. So it's that end-to-end process of everything that's involved. Without procurement, it would be impossible for businesses to function. Businesses these days outsource a lot of things. They don't do everything internally. So procurement management ensures that all these items and services that we need to function as a business are properly acquired, so our projects, our processes can proceed successfully and efficiently. And again, it used to be looked at as kind of this back office necessity that it wasn't that important, but it is important. Not only is it a necessity, but good procurement can be leveraged as a competitive advantage when we optimize it to save money, time, and resources and ensure good quality. So the amount of money that organizations spend with outside suppliers is absolutely staggering. You really want to think that so many businesses buy from other businesses, but organizations on average are buying more from external suppliers and are doing less internally. And this trend has really been driven by globalization and a desire to focus on internal resources and on internal core competencies, whatever that business is the best at, and they're going to outsource the rest. So let's take Cold Stone Creamery, for example. They make ice cream, and they're going to perhaps hire their direct employees who are going to be the people who give out the ice cream. Maybe they even make some of the ice cream themselves. But guess what? If they need a janitorial service, they're probably not going to do that with their own employees or their own resources. They're going to outsource that to another company where janitorial is their core competency. So again, more and more companies are focusing on their internal core competencies and buying more from external suppliers. That is just a trend that is ongoing. So more and more companies are buying more from suppliers. So the amount of revenue that organizations pay out to suppliers is going to vary depending on the industry that they're in and by the individual organization itself. In terms of manufacturing organizations, the money that most manufacturing organizations pay to outside suppliers for their raw materials is usually the biggest category of spend. Usually this is between 50 to 80% of total revenue. That is a staggering amount of what is going to paying suppliers. And a study of Fortune 500 companies found that their external supplier costs account for 75% of their total spend. So maybe they're spending the other 25% on internal facilities and payroll costs, but 75% of their costs go to external suppliers to buy goods, services, to keep the business running, to create the products and services that create revenue for us. So organizations buy or outsource materials, components, or services from suppliers for many different reasons. There may be a cost advantage. Maybe they do it cheaper than we could. Maybe we don't have sufficient capacity. We just don't have the ability. to create as much as we want. Maybe we just don't have the expertise in it and it's just not in our wheelhouse. Or maybe an external supplier can produce better quality that we can in-house. So let's talk about the cost advantage first. So for many firms, cost is a very important reason for outsourcing. A lot of suppliers have the advantage of economies of scale because they supply large quantities of the exact same item to multiple buyers. Whereas if we did it on a much smaller scale, we wouldn't be able to get those economies of scale. In most outsourcing cases, the quantity that we need is so small that it really doesn't justify the investment in capital equipment to make an item. So if Monmouth College, for example, we need pens for our staff, Monmouth College probably isn't going to set up its own pen factory because we just don't have the quantity needed to justify that. So we're going to outsource and buy our pens from an outside supplier. And some foreign suppliers may also offer a cost advantage because of the lower labor and or material costs. It's just cheaper in other parts of the world to create something and it just makes sense that we would outsource it and buy from these suppliers. So insufficient capacity. So our business may be running at or near capacity, and we're unable to produce the necessary additional items in-house. This can happen a lot of times if demand grows a lot faster than we anticipate. Our forecast was a little low and demand is much higher than we expected, or if we're deciding to expand and we're not doing it fast enough. So a lot of times this does happen, especially if a company is up and coming. So the business is going to end up buying parts, components to free up their internal capacity in the short term and to focus on their vital operations. So we just may not have the capacity to do so. And lack of expertise. We may not, as a business, have the necessary technology, expertise for a certain item or a certain service. If we are focusing too heavily on our non-core activities, this is going to affect our ability to focus on our actual core competencies. Again, with Cold Stone Creamery, if we are so focused on things like janitorial services, we aren't going to be able to focus on the actual core competencies of ice cream. And our suppliers, they may also hold some sort of patent or copyright to the process or product in question. So we have to go to them. Our organization may also not be able to meet the environmental or safety standards needed to manufacture that item in-house. And it's just easier and cheaper to outsource it to someone else, just because we don't have the expertise to do so. And then quality. A lot of times, if we are going to be buying from an external supplier, the purchased goods and services are going to be superior in quality. Suppliers may have better technology, better processes, more skilled labor. They may have advantages of economies of scale that we just don't have. So the supplier's superior quality is going to help us stay on top of product and process technologies. We can benefit from them being much better at it and having higher quality than we do. And this is especially true in very high technology industries that have really rapid innovation, and it's hard for certain businesses to keep up, or they have really short product life cycles. So quality is a main reason why we would outsource and buy from external suppliers. So procurement activities are typically split into two different categories. We've got our direct procurement and we have our indirect procurement. So direct procurement. Direct procurement is typically the focus of supply chain management. It directly affects the production processes of any manufacturing or production firm. So direct procurement involves acquiring the raw materials, the parts, the components that are directly used to create a product. So say, for example, with Apple, They're creating iPhones. So they need the semiconductors. They need the plastic for the phone body itself. They need the special glass on top. This is direct procurement. These raw materials that are going to go directly in to create the product. So, and again, usually this is related to manufacturing or production operations where raw materials are turned into physical products. So again, direct procurement is the focus in supply chain management. So another example, a direct procurement for an auto manufacturer could include items, those raw materials that will be used to actually create the vehicle, the steel, the plastic, the tires, the glass that will be the windshield and the windows, the engine parts, the semiconductors. These are all things that direct procurement would be responsible for buying. And again, the materials that often end up in the final product for the customers, whatever that final product is. We've got a picture of a delicious chocolate donut with multicolored sprinkles on it. If we were doing direct procurement, that would be the yeast, the flour, the chocolate frosting, the sprinkles, all of those materials that would end up in this final product. These purchases are usually made in very large quantities. They're usually acquired from a big pool of suppliers at the best possible cost, quality, and reliability. And if direct procurement somehow stops functioning, they don't do their job or they're encountering problems, companies are no longer able to manufacture their product and create revenue. If we don't buy all the ingredients to create our donuts, we're not going to have a donut, and our customers won't have a donut, and we won't have revenue because no one is buying the donut that does not exist. Indirect procurement. So this is our other category of procurement. So indirect procurement involves purchasing goods, services, supplies, materials that are required to keep the day-to-day business running. They aren't necessarily going to be in that end product that our consumers actually buy. So indirect procurement may involve purchases such as equipment repair, to repair things around the office or in our production facility. It could include office supplies. It could include maintenance services. It could include employee travel. We still need these types of purchases to happen in order to keep our business running, but they aren't directly related to that core product or service that we are creating for our customer. Indirect procurement does not add to the business's bottom line. However, without indirect procurement functions, businesses would not be able to operate effectively. And typically, indirect procurement is about 15 to 30% of a company's total revenue. But again, this will vary based on the individual business, based on the type of industry that they're in. And indirect procurement is not typically a primary concern of supply chains. Again, it's important to the actual day-to-day business, and the business needs to keep running, but it's usually not a primary concern of supply chains. So direct procurement is the concern of supply chains. Indirect procurement, not so much. It is important, but it's not a primary concern of supply chain. So let's talk about the procurement process. So the essential steps in the procurement process are, and again, this is not the end all and be all list of how a procurement process goes. If you look at different types of literature, and there's going to be different steps or slightly different variations of it, but it's all going to be essentially the same thing. So just know this is not the end all and be all holy grail of the procurement process, but this is a good general guideline. And most general guidelines are going to follow the same thing. So first, we've got a recognition of need. Second, we've actually got to describe what that is. What is the actual description of the need? We need to be able to put it in words. Then we've got our identification and analysis of possible sources of supply. Then we've got our supplier selection and determination of terms. Next, we've got our preparation and finalization of our purchase order or our contract. 6, we've got our follow-up or expediting of that order. 7, we've got a receipt and inspection. 8, we've got our invoice clearing and payment. And 9, we've got our maintenance of records and maintenance of those supplier relationships. So let's get started and go through the procurement process. So step 1, a recognition of need. So the purchase is going to originate when a person or a system somewhere in the business, they identify a definite need in the organization. We need something that we don't have, and we've got to figure out what that is, how much of it, and when is it needed. A lot of times the procurement department is going to help anticipate the needs of other departments. They may have statistics and data, historical data, and they're going to try to figure out what these businesses need. The procurement department also tracks price trends, general market conditions, so they're kind of aware of what's going on with the suppliers and with product availability. And procurement should also ensure that they're informing the internal users what the typical lead time is and any major changes for all standard purchase items. So procurement is going to work with someone within the business to help recognize this need. And number 2, we've got the description of the need. So the purchaser has to know exactly what that internal customer wants. Again, there can be nothing left up to interpretation. We need to know, what do you want? So procurement and that internal user usually share responsibility for accurately describing the item or the service that they need. It's essential to have an accurate description of the need, whether it's a tangible good, whether it's an intangible service, or some combination of goods and services bundled together. Sometimes actually creating a description of what we need to be able to communicate it to external suppliers is one of the most difficult tasks in procurement. So this step involves translating what we need into standard commercial language so that suppliers can actually understand what is required. What do we want? If we have ambiguous descriptions that are very unclear, or we go on the other end of the spectrum where we overly specify materials or quality levels and we get too in the weeds with it, it's going to lead to unnecessary costs or us getting something that we necessarily don't need or want. So procurement and the internal user usually share this responsibility as well for accurately describing the item or service that we need. So a description of our need is going to vary depending on what we want to buy and could include things like dimensions, could include physical or chemical characteristics. It could be a specific brand name. It could be a specific performance by function. It could be an engineering drawing. It could be a grade of material. It could be a specific stock keeping unit or SKU. It could be a statement of work or SOW for services. So it's really going to vary based on what we actually need to buy, but we've got to provide a good quality description so our suppliers can understand what we want and they can provide that to us. So step 3 is going to be identification of potential sources. So a lot of procurement professionals prefer to buy from a current supplier or an incumbent supplier, if it's all possible. They've already been onboarded. Usually we have an existing relationship with them. Usually we kind of have standard expectations. There's already a record of past performance with us, usually a good one if we want to buy from them. The communication, the logistics requirements are already in place. And it makes sense. Both us as the purchasing organization and the supplier stand to benefit from this pre-existing relationship. However, it's not always going to be feasible to buy from one of our incumbent suppliers. They may not be suitable for what we want to buy. They may not be a suitable fit for what we need. They may not provide those services. They may not provide the item that we need. So we may need to look for potential new sources. So procurement managers are typically going to research suppliers that can fulfill all the different things that we need. based on timeline, cost, and quantity. So they're going to go out there and do some market research on whom can we buy from. So sources of potential suppliers include our internal company records, our records of current and past suppliers. Maybe my department has not bought from this vendor, but maybe another department has. So I can look in my internal company records. I could look at industry organizations. I could look at registers and directories. I could look at catalogs, internet journals, trade journals, and also just a good Google search sometimes will do the trick just to at least get you started and finding certain leads in terms of suppliers that can provide whatever it is that you need. So a procurement manager typically has three formal, again, there can be a lot of things done informal, but there are three formal options for communicating with potential suppliers. And we're going to call these solicitation tools. And each of these solicitation tools, each three of these formal solicitation options will signify a level of complexity of the purchase, the potential dollar value, and the degree of risk that is going to be on the supplier. So we could have a request for information, which is called an RFI, a request for quotation, which is called an RFQ, and a request for proposal, which is an RFP. And we're going to go through each of these. So the request for information, an RFI. An RFI is used to simply gather information about a potential supplier's products and services and gaining marketplace intelligence. It gives procurement managers the opportunity to obtain information about the supplier's capabilities and make decisions about potential future relationships. Again, even though we have the internet, we have search engine tools like Google, that enables us to do pretty quick, pretty easy searches out there, but many organizations still need to prepare and send RFI to suppliers to get the information that we really need to start making decisions. And an RFI is not a solicitation for business or an offer to do business. It is only for information gathering purposes. That's all it is. It is not going to be a binding anything. You're not asking for specific pricing. You're just getting general information. It's like almost like a survey of sorts, a formal survey. So that is a request for information. We just want to find out more information about what the supplier can do, an RFI. The drawback to an RFI is a lot of times procurement professionals end up overusing it, and they use it too often, and it gets sent to every single supplier multiple times. So suppliers may say, this just is not worth my time. I'm going to ignore this, and I'm not going to answer it, because procurement managers have typically abused it and used it too much. Instead of conducting research themselves, a lot of procurement professionals see RFIs as a quick shortcut, so they habitually resort to RFIs as a method for gathering information. And because suppliers get so many of them, they're overwhelmed, they don't want to answer them. So that is a drawback to an RFI, is that because it is so overused, our suppliers may not be very responsive to it. And the next one, again, we're going to be increasing in terms of complexity, in terms of price as we go through. So the next one is request for quotation, or request for quote, and you'll see the acronym RFQ. So this is a solicitation document that is used to obtain actual price quotes for a specific product, for a specific service, for a specific need. Typically, we are going to issue an RFQ if we have a very clear, very unambiguous description of a need. So if we know that we want a certain stock keeping unit, a certain SKU, that is very specific. There is no way you can misinterpret that. It's very clear. So that would be a perfect example of when we would use an RFQ, a request for quotation. And we would request that that supplier provide us with a quote or a price for that specific stock keeping unit. And then our next one, the last one, is request for proposal. So an RFP, this is typically used for more complex requirements where price is not the only decision factor. We've got a lot of other decision factors. Or an RFP is used when our specifications cannot be described objectively. They're very subjective. They're very fuzzy because perhaps the product or the service is not fully developed or fully specified. Perhaps we need the supplier to help us with that process. And typically, the purchasing organization is planning to negotiate price and terms, including the scope of work. A lot of times you'll see this for intangible services because there's a lot of gray area in services. So the RFP is usually going to include a detailed description of the requirements, and it's going to invite our suppliers who are bidding to use their expertise to actually develop and propose one or more solutions. So RFP is used for the more complex types of purchases. So let's talk about step 4, supplier selection and determination of terms. So usually, just like us as consumers buying things on the marketplace, there are usually a lot of different products, brands, stores, retailers. There's going to be a lot of different supplier possibilities for buying goods and service in the business marketplace. So it's very important to make the right selection from this very long list of potential suppliers. And there are many different ways to determine who is our winning supplier. And all the different tools range from a very simple bid analysis to very complex negotiations. But we've got to determine which one of these suppliers are we going to buy from. So some very common supplier selection criteria include: what is the price? What is their past performance with us, with similar companies? How is their communication? Are they very quick to respond to all of our inquiries? Is it very slow? Do we get tossed around from person to person? How about the financial stability of their company? Are they looking like they could go bankrupt or are having big financial problems? Probably don't want to be buying from them. How is their innovation? What is their capacity? Do they truly have the capacity to take on what we need them to do? What are their processes? Do they align with our processes? So there's a lot of different things that we can look at other than simply price alone. And some additional criteria that we want to consider in terms of who are we going to buy from? Which supplier are we going to choose? Should we only buy from one supplier, a single source? Should we buy from 2 suppliers, a dual source? Or should we buy from 10 suppliers, more than 2 sources? Should we buy from the original manufacturer or should we buy from a distribution? The size of the supplier, do we want them to be small? Do we want them to be a medium-sized company, or do we want them to be a large Fortune 500 company? And then where do we want them to be located? Do we want them to be local? Do we want them to be in the same town as us? Do we want them to be regional? Do we want them to be national? Can they be offshore somewhere internationally? So there's a lot of different criteria that we've got to ask ourselves in terms of who is the right supplier to choose from when we are deciding which supplier to buy from. A very common perspective to take when evaluating suppliers during selection is to consider what is called the total value perspective. And what that means, what that boils down to, is which supplier is likely going to provide the highest total value to our firm for the long-term relationship. Again, sometimes you can look short-term, but who is going to provide the highest total value long-term to the firm? And sometimes that's a very hard question to answer. And in determining terms of the agreement, we need to ensure we have all the possible questions and expectations within the terms of our agreement. Addressing these in the contract or purchase order at the very beginning of the relationship will benefit both parties. So let's take an example of a fast food restaurant. They make hamburgers and cheeseburgers. So what questions would this fast food company need to consider when establishing the contract terms with the supplier who's going to be providing the hamburger buns? What types of things do you think that they would need to ask themselves? So let's talk about that. So how many buns does the supplier need to deliver? Do they need to deliver 1 bun Or do they need to deliver 1,000,000 buns? What is the price we are going to pay for the buns? Is it on a per bun basis? And how are we going to measure the quality of the buns? Does it have to be a certain number of sesame seeds on the bun or the level of squishiness of the bun? How are we going to measure the quality? And how quickly does the supplier need to deliver the order? What is the lead time we need to give them? Is it an hour? Is it a year? And how long is this contract going to last? Are we going to have this contract for 10 years? Are we going to have it for 6 months? And we've got to think about, is this proprietary? Can our suppliers sell the same buns to other restaurants? Can they sell it to our competitors? Maybe we want to ensure that there's a non-compete offer in there. And how are we going to resolve issues and disagreements? These are usually going to be inevitable. There's going to be some sort of issue that's going to arise. How we've got to manage a process to ensure that we can come to some sort of agreement. And when are we going to pay for the buns? Do we need to prepay? Do we need to pay when delivered? Do we need to pay 30 days after delivery? These are all the things we've got to think about when we're determining the terms of our agreement. So terms typically include information on the quantity, on the price, on delivery, on shipping requirements, engineering drawings, conditions of acceptance, us saying, yes, this is a quality product, we accept it, the payment terms, and any other important factors that are going to affect the acceptability of the products or services. So this is a very important part of procurement, is determining the right terms. So let's talk about payment terms. So negotiating when we pay our suppliers for the products or services that we purchase is an incredibly powerful tool. So managing our payment terms can greatly affect the financial performance of our business and also the players in our supply chain. And they can greatly affect our internal cash flow and our working capital as the business. So business payment terms typically come in 3 main categories. So we've got payment in advance, payment upon delivery, and net payment terms. And let's go through each of these. So payment in advance or prepayment. So this is paying for a good or service before you actually receive it. So advance payments are sometimes required by sellers to protect themselves against a business or a consumer that just doesn't pay. It's going to protect them against non-payment. Or perhaps it's going to cover their out-of-pocket costs for supplying this product or service. This is riskier for us as the purchasing organization. But this is how some vendors do it. So an example of payment in advance. Typically, when you buy anything online, you are paying in advance. That money is taken from your checking account or to your credit card before you actually receive the item when it comes in the mail a few days later. So this is typically how we buy as consumers. You are paying in advance. Now, payment upon delivery. These are payment terms where the purchasing organization, the recipient, pays for a good or service at the time of delivery rather than paying in advance or using credit. A supplier may want an organization to pay as soon as it delivers that product or service. With payment on delivery, there is some risk that that buying organization won't pay, but the supplier at least is going to know right away and can take some immediate action. So a normal everyday example of payment upon delivery is when you order a pizza, the pizza delivery person appears and you give them the cash. That is payment upon delivery. You are paying when that product or service is actually delivered to you and you have it in hand. And our last one, our net payment terms. Most B2B suppliers are going to sell products and services, and then they're going to wait to get paid at a later date. This is very common in business-to-business transactions. So this is a form of credit called net payment terms. So net days is the number, the time after the invoice date that the customers need to make the full payment. Usually you'll see net 15, so that means they have to pay within 15 days, net 30, net 60, or net 90, but you could see all the way up to like net 180. And this is the most advantageous method for the buyer, for us as the buying organization. We get to hold on to our money for longer. We can do whatever we want with that money for the number of days that we have to pay. So the most common payment terms for most organizations is net 15, which means we wouldn't actually have to pay that supplier for 45 days until after the invoice date or until after the actual services have been rendered or product has been delivered. So net 45 is usually the most common payment terms you're going to see in different organizations. And again, net payment terms are the most advantageous for us as the buying organization because we get to hold on to our money for longer. Okay, let's take a break here and we will get back in the next section. So thank you very much, guys, and I will see you soon.